that whatever is said, and whatever was said in that statement at the end of the programme, it shouldn't have come to this. We are here to say, publicly and to the world, or to Harrods in front of the world, that it is time that they took responsibility, and it is time that they set matters right. And that is something they should do as soon as possible. They need to face up, to accept the responsibility that they have full culpability for the abuse that these women suffered. Today, we are going to set out our claim and how our claim shows an abject failure of corporate responsibility, and I would invite you to underline those words, an abject failure of corporate responsibility and a failure to provide a safe system of work. It's my pleasure then to introduce next my colleague, Barrister Bruce Drummond.
Thank you, Dean. I mean, wow, simply wow. I've worked on this case now for over a year, talking to some of these amazing ladies, and to see them all sitting here today is just incredible. Well done, all of you. I would also like to echo what my colleague Dean has said in saying that this is one of the worst cases of corporate sexual exploitation that certainly I, and perhaps the world, has ever seen. It was absolutely horrific. And I cannot stress that word enough. It was horrific. It's horrific because the acts carried out against these young women and girls, and I say girls because most of them were only 19 to 24 at the time, and some were as young as 15 and 16. It's horrific because the system, and it was a system, that procured them was enabling the abuse of these young women. And it's horrific because the effects that this sexual abuse and of Harrods' institutional betrayal have had on our clients. These effects have lasted years, and in some instances for decades, and even continue to this day. And you must remember that when you're looking at this type of case, that it's not just something that happens and then goes away or they get over. This has life-changing and lifelong effects on these dear ladies. Some of the survivors even ended up in psychiatric care. Some have been able to have intimate relationships. Some continue to suffer from nightmares, depression, and anxiety. So we're here today to say to the world that this was not right. This should never have happened. And Harrods must accept responsibility for the damage these women have suffered. I would also like to say a huge thank you to Keaton Stone, who's with us today, for all his investigative work. To the BBC, who've been amazing, and most importantly, to the survivors, for allowing me to be part of a team to represent them. As you saw in the documentary, Keaton has worked tirelessly to deliver some sort of justice for these women. Keaton, buddy, you're a legend. We wouldn't be here without you. So first meeting Keaton about this case, I've worked with him closely to investigate and speak with the women. From first speaking to one of the survivors and after hearing the story, my heart sank and my blood boiled, quite frankly. I told myself I would do everything I could to bring justice and accountability for all the survivors who've been left at the hands of a monster like Al-Fayed. Realising the significance of the case that I was about to embark upon, I approached Dean, a highly respected QC, and importantly has had a wealth of experience in dealing with horrible cases. And then Maria, who's been amazing. We needed a team to take on this monstrous system. To then extend that to say we would very welcome the input of one of the world's leading, well, probably the world's leading female rights lawyer in the world, who is amongst the top advocate for women's rights that I've ever come across. And happily and gladly, she's here today, bless her. And she's jumped on board to help these ladies. So that's why I'm here anyway, ready for the next stage of this. You know, I'll answer questions afterwards, but for now I'll hand over to Maria, I think is the next to say something.
Thank you very much, Bruce. So I would like to talk about the system that was in place at Harrods at the time. Once selected for their role by the special recruitment process that we've been able to identify, the women would be sent to have a private medical examination. Medical examinations would be undertaken by 3 or 4 private doctors that we have been able to identify, one of whom was named Dr. Anne Coxon in the documentary last night. The women would arrive for their medical examination none the wiser, expecting this to be an examination to perhaps check their weight, their blood pressure, or their height. They would then be told that actually the examination would involve a full internal screening, including a full cervical smear, sometimes having their ovaries checked, and a full sexual health screening. This was for their role that they had been offered as secretary, personal assistant, or even, on occasions, interior designer. For some women, this would have been their first ever smear test. If the women would query why the tests were necessary, they would be told something along the lines of, "He wants to make sure that you are clean." The results were really provided to them personally, but Mohammed Al-Fayed and his enablers would know those results. Because if there was ever anything untoward about those results, he would make degrading and humiliating comments to the women personally about what he had been told about their medical examination. As we know, the grooming, sexual assaults and threatening behaviour were varied and plentiful, but they all followed a similar pattern of events that we have been able to identify. The surveillance in place at the time was absolutely extensive. The phone lines were bugged. There was video surveillance in place throughout the offices, aside, of course, from the chairman's office, where there was no video at all. Ladies were frequently followed, and we have witness evidence that we have obtained from members of the security team who had the job of keeping an eye on those ladies, to check what they were doing, to even check if they were in relationships. One woman we know was 16 or 17, and she was sent to be followed by a member of the security team to check if she was in a relationship. That member of the security team would have to report back to Mohammed Al-Fayed on what he heard. I should also say that this member of the security team had the job of having to listen in to the women's phone lines. if there were any conversations that he heard that sounded untoward, or if the women dared to speak negatively on those phone lines about Mohammed Al-Fayed, he would need to report that back. He recalls hearing the women often having to speak in some kind of code. In relation to the threats that the women received, if they ever attempted to complain about the sexual assaults, we know from our work that we've undertaken that they would receive threats along the lines of, "You'll never work in London again. I know where you and your family live." Often, they would be demoted, and false allegations would be made about them, so that they had no choice at all but to leave Harrods. The threat of involving the police would also be made by the security team, and on occasion, from our investigations, we know that this would be followed through. One woman that we represent was sexually assaulted, and she had the bravery and courage to raise this in a formal written complaint to Harrods. On the same day of making this written complaint, the head of security, John McNamara, contacted her and said, "You are a girl alone in London. Someone could jump out the bushes at you, or you could have a sudden accident. You need to deny what you have said in the first letter with a second letter, which you must drop off before noon the following day." She, of course, did what she was told because she was absolutely petrified. Another woman who we represent wished to resign because of the sexual assaults and degrading behaviour. She tried to resign to get away from it. She was called into the office by the head of security, who told her that she had been disloyal to the chairman and that she had to leave immediately. If she ever dared talk to the press or revealed any information about the chairman, she was told in explicit terms that there would be serious consequences. Once this woman did leave, she was subjected to threats over the phone from the head of security and became very ill and suicidal. She was admitted into a psychiatric unit for 6 months of her life. She was unable, after that experience, to form any proper relationships with any other man, and lost out on the opportunity to have her own family as a result of all of this. I cannot emphasize enough that how many of the women that we represent have told me personally things that they haven't been able to share with another soul. Some women have hung on to confidential documents that they could use, if forced to do so, as a security blanket in case Mohammed Al-Fayed or any of his associates ever tried to come after them. One woman said to me, "That was the fear he drove in you, Maria." I would also like to say this. I know that some women that we represent were too afraid to come to this press conference today. I would like them to know that we are all thinking about them. Thank you for letting me share this with you. I'm now going to hand over to attorney Gloria Allred, who, as we know, has represented victims in high-profile cases all over the world, and it is a privilege to share the stage with her today. Thank you, Gloria.
Thank you, Maria. My name is Gloria Allred, and I'm an attorney from the United States. If I may take a moment for personal privilege, I would like to have stand up and recognize my partner of 48 years who is here with me today, my law partner, Nathan Goldberg, and my associate in my law firm, Olivia Fleischig. Thank you. I've been representing victims for the past 48 years, including victims of Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, R. Kelly, and now victims of Sean Diddy Combs, to name just a few. I have also represented victims of Bill Cosby, including one victim who we represented in a civil trial against him, which we won. In addition, in one lawsuit against the owner of a company, we represented a female employee and won at trial a judgment in excess of $52 million against that owner who sexually harassed our client. I am very familiar with how powerful men use their wealth, positions of power, and fame to subject women and girls to sexual abuse. The allegations against Mohammed Al-Fayed include serial rape, attempted rape, sexual battery, and sexual abuse of minors. They involve doctors administering invasive gynecological exams as a condition of employment for some of the employees who were targeted by Mohammed Al-Fayed for sexual abuse by him. The allegations also include the unauthorized disclosure to Mohammed Al-Fayed of the examination results of employees he targeted for sexual abuse. The allegations involve cover-ups, threats, and a quarter-century of sexual abuse by Mohammed Al-Fayed after he purchased Harrods and became its chairman. Harrods is often referred to as the most beautiful store in the world. It has a storied and glamorous history. Many women dreamed of working there, to be associated with this prestigious corporation and to further their careers. However, underneath Harrods' glitz and glamour was a toxic, unsafe, and abusive environment. Shakespeare's Hamlet said, quote, "Something is rotten in the state of Denmark," end quote. We say something was rotten at the core of Harrods. The store was known for catering to every need of its customers, and it was presented as the epitome of beauty. The ugly truth, however, was that a number of female employees were being sexually abused by its chairman, Mohammed Al-Fayed. The current owners purchased Harrods in 2010. Their statement in the BBC documentary appears to suggest that they were unaware of this history of sexual abuse. However, in the documentary, it is alleged that Al-Fayed's abuse was not a secret and was widely known by its employees. Perhaps the new owners were blinded by the billions of dollars they stood to gain, or by their opportunity to buy a piece of Great Britain's history. When Mohammed Al-Fayed sold Harrods, a spokesperson for Al-Fayed said he, quote, specifically chose, end quote, the buyers to, quote, ensure that the legacy and traditions that he has built up in Harrods would be continued, end quote. Al-Fayed's legacy was to prey upon, denigrate, humiliate, and abuse female employees for his own sexual gratification. That is a legacy that no one should continue. There are certain themes that emerge from the BBC documentary. Most of the victims were terrified and felt that they had no place to turn. They felt powerless and they feared retaliation. Their terror was reinforced by threats, surveillance, and phone tapping. It is also apparent from the documentary that many of the women were vulnerable and that Al-Fayed took advantage of their vulnerability. He used his wealth and his power to manipulate and control female victims for his sexual pleasure. Another common theme was that Al-Fayed's sexual misconduct was constant and repetitive and went on for 25 years that he owned Harrods. He was the epitome of a serial sexual abuser. Yet another theme was that Al-Fayed's sexual abuse was not confined to the Harrods store. For example, sexual abuse occurred at the Ritz, Paris, and in his residence in Paris, which was formerly the residence of the Duke of Windsor. He required some female employees to accompany him on overnight trips to various locations, ostensibly for work, but actually to facilitate his sexual exploitation of them. Mohammed Al-Fayed died last year at 94 years old. He died without ever taking responsibility for what he did to many of his victims. These victims have suffered for years, even decades. They have lived with the shame, humiliation, and the anguish that Mohammed Al-Fayed and Harrods caused them. Al-Fayed was determined to silence these women. They will be silenced no more. We are proud of all of the women who are coming forward to seek accountability. The good news is that civil justice is still available for them, and they will not rest until they obtain it. It is not enough for Harrods to now say that they are sorry. It is not enough to acknowledge that Harrods failed these women. Justice demands that the victims receive meaningful accountability for what they have suffered. We are glad that the new owners of Harrods have acknowledged that Harrods failed those who were victimized there, and that they are, quote, determined to do the right thing as an organization, end quote. We believe in deeds, not words. It is never too late to do the right thing. This is an opportunity for Harrods to prove their assertion that, quote, the Harrods of today is a very different organization, end quote, and that their words match their conduct. The time for justice is now, and we look forward to victims obtaining meaningful justice. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to now ask Natasha to tell us some very personal matters to share with you today.
Today, I finally have the opportunity and freedom to speak up. I no longer feel afraid, so I speak for my daughters, my nieces, for my good friend Catherine, and all the survivors of sexual abuse in this room today that were silenced for so many years, who suffered at the hand of the predator, Mohammed Al-Fayed. Those who abuse need to know that it's not okay. One day, like today, they will be found out and exposed. I was just 19 years old, young, naive, and totally innocent. I had moved to London to start my working career. I got an interview for a job at Harrods, working for Mohammed Al-Fayed, or the chairman as he was well known. It was a supporting role to his then private PA. I was interviewed by Mr. Al-Fayed in his office at Harrods. I got the job straight away. I believed I had been given the chance of a lifetime, an exciting job in an incredibly dynamic environment with endless opportunities to look forward to. I could not believe how lucky I was. Imagine the possibilities. This was my passport to a shining, high-powered career. Mohammed was clever and highly manipulative. He behaved like a father figure, often saying, "Call me Papa," often talking about his family and children as if to make me feel safe around him. He would ask kind and seemingly caring questions. He offered extra money for gifts to take home to my parents or to buy new work clothes. It all seemed entirely innocent and normal then, a perk of working for such a powerful man. Unbeknownst to me, I had walked into a lion's den, a lair of cover-ups, deceit, lies, manipulation, humiliation, and gross sexual misconduct. The chairman preyed on the most vulnerable, those of us who needed to pay the rent, and some of us who didn't have parents to protect them. As time went by, I noticed more and more how strange the office atmosphere was. There was no camaraderie. It felt like a very secretive atmosphere. The other girls used to whisper to each other, but I was actively discouraged from making friends. I did, however, make a friend. We kept it very secret, Catherine, who sits in front of me today. From my dream job and high hopes, this then became my reality. Mohammed Al-Fayed, a sick predator, lured me in by using the same modus operandi he used time and time again. I was subjected to an unnecessary and intrusive medical examination. I was never given those results. I was subjected to AIDS and STD testing without consent, and now believe in hindsight, I was checked for my purity. We would be sent to see Al-Fayed because he had a job for us to do. It was always more of a friendly chat than actual work. But then these private meetings turned into more. A forced kiss, his hands gripping your face to his lips, or pulling you down on his lap, where his hands were free to explore any part of your body that he wished. These incidents lasted seconds, but the fear instilled left me paralyzed. Al-Fayed brushed off these moments like they had never happened. But I was always reminded not to mention them to anyone. He would know if I did. I had never experienced anything like it before. I was so young, I didn't know what to do and how to deal with it. I felt such fear and some sick loyalty as his employee. It was an era where women were still the underclass in the working world. One night I was asked to stay late. This was to be my final night. All of MAF's, or Mohammed Al-Fayed's planning and manipulation were to come to fruition. He summoned me up to his private apartment on the pretext of a job review. I was escorted by one of his security guards who ushered me into his private sitting room. The door was locked behind me. Al-Fayed handed me a glass of champagne and told me to sit. Looking around, I saw his bedroom door partially open. There were sex toys on view. I felt petrified. I perched myself at the very end of the sofa, and then it came. Mohammed Al-Fayed, my boss, the person I work for, pushed himself onto me. I fell to the floor with him still on top of me. but I managed to kick free and free myself. I ran towards the door. I told him I was meeting my father for dinner and he would be worried that I was late. He just laughed at me. He then composed himself and he told me in no uncertain terms that I was never to breathe a word of this to anyone. If I did, I would never work in London again, and he knew where my family lived. I felt scared and sick. Eventually leaving Park Lane, I never set foot in his private office again. These events impacted me for many years to come. I struggled with confidence around men, and in particular male bosses, and also in my personal relationships. Seeing his obituary just over a year ago triggered such a huge emotion. I couldn't believe that this monster had gotten away with his crimes. Thankfully today, this is a different story, and I am truly grateful for that.
Natasha, thank you so much for sharing your story with us all. All of this room salutes you. In fact, we salute all of the survivors in this case. To say that it takes bravery to come and tell a story such as that is an understatement. Again, for those of you watching today who experienced abuse at Harrods, hopefully this shows that you're not alone. Please do reach out to our team if you would like to learn more about legal options. There is support and there is a place to discuss. As of now, we have the huge honour of being retained by 37 survivors in this matter. And as a result of the documentary and events such as this, we are in the process of being retained by many more. We are very proud to be so. It is important that we stress this. We are representing each person as an individual. Every person's experience and the effect on every person, every survivor, is different. And we promise that we will treat them all with the individualized attention and dignity that they deserve. We're now going to move on to some questions from the media. We'll do our best. I will be, in a sense, acting as the person who directs the questions. And if we may, it would obviously help that we have as many people asking questions as possible as opposed to someone asking lots and lots of questions.
We have a roving mic. Please put your hand up. We'll bring the mic to you. Again, we can limit to one question, one follow-up, so we can move as quickly as we can. Please state your outlet and name, please.
Hi, Danielle Hamamjan, NBC News. Thank you, Natasha. My first question, first of all, to the women who've signed NDAs, what is your message to them? Has the documentary laid out the most serious allegations, or based on your conversations with the victims, have we yet to hear the worst of it? And as you mentioned in the case of Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, there were facilitators, as is the case here. Are they liable for prosecution? And do you know of any of those individuals potentially still working at Harrods today?
So we'll break down your three questions. I'll deal with the first one, which is the NDAs. Maria, would you deal with the second one? And Gloria, would you like to deal with the last one? The Epstein one?
No.
All right. In terms of the NDAs, I was quoted last night on the documentary as saying that it should never be the case, and I am not of the view that it's the law, that the law should protect those who engage and indulge in criminal activities. And it's very, very important to remember the circumstances in which those NDAs and some settlements were given. There was no level playing field. We heard last night in the documentary that material had to be shredded and was effectively forced as part of that to be shredded. And so the answer to the question about the effect of the NDAs, we will fight their veracity and their applicability. We are very confident that those NDAs will not preclude us from getting justice from these women.
In terms of your second question, was that whether or not there are more serious damning allegations to come forward beyond
Yes.
what we have seen already in the documentary? Yes, unfortunately so. From the numerous women that we represent, we have a number of more serious allegations that have been made. Also, that don't just concern Mohammed Al-Fayed, but we're not able to go into any further about that now. But yes, this was certainly a system that was in place at the very heart of the company. The worst sexual assaults that you can imagine.
Sorry, I didn't answer the third one, which I will. The question was about criminal prosecutions as followed in Epstein. First of all, it's not in our gift as to whether people are prosecuted. Our sole concern is justice for these women.
Hi, Simon Viger from 5 News. One question for Dean Armstrong, please, and one for Gloria Allred. For Mr. Armstrong, you say you're pursuing Harrods. Can you explain why you're not also pursuing the estate, the Fayed estate? And for Gloria Allred, we've heard comparisons with Epstein, Weinstein, Savile. How do you think this case compares?
Shall I take the first one, or would you like to take the first one? Do you want to answer first, or do you want me to?
The question about Weinstein?
Yes.
How do I feel about it?
Yes, is it one of the worst? How does it compare in terms of severity?
I don't like to compare sexual predators one to another, and he was a sexual predator, Mohammed Al-Fayed. Many of them that I have dealt with were the worst. And this is also the worst. I mean, so for example, Jeffrey Epstein, had a method, had a plan, executed the plan, and chose vulnerable victims. Underage girls and adults as well. He sex trafficked them and was prosecuted for sex trafficking underage girls, among other charges against him. Of course, he committed suicide while in custody or was the victim of a homicide. Coroner says suicide. But in any event, there was a criminal prosecution against him, which started, I actually was there at the last hearing that was taking place. The trial had not yet taken place. So he died before there was any justice, real justice, for the victims. I will say after his death, we did represent a number of victims, actually our 20 victims, and was able to get meaningful accountability for them in the civil process without a lawsuit. And again, our victims in that case were very, very, very courageous. And many would have been willing to testify at trial. In the case of Mohammed Al-Fayed, he's also no longer alive to be prosecuted for his crimes against women. I might add that these victims were also placed by Mohammed Al-Fayed in a no-win situation. Excuse me. These were not just strangers to him. These were victims in an employment situation. He had all the power. They had none. And they were in a no-win situation. Do they say no and lose their job? Do they say yes and suffer the consequences of being raped or sexually assaulted, sexually abused, victimized? This is why an employment situation, well, at least in the United States, is considered a denial of equal employment opportunity if a victim is sexually harassed or sexually abused, raped, forced to watch pornography, any act of sexual abuse. And it is really wrong because, as it has been sent, there's no right decision for these victims to make. It's always going to be a risk to themselves and also to their families. So R. Kelly knowingly gave serious sexual STDs to underage girls. One of my clients testified very bravely about that at his criminal trial. It's lifelong sexually transmitted diseases. That is just beyond description, that he would do that knowing that he had that very serious sexually transmitted disease himself and did not disclose that to underage girls and some adults. He also, of course, videoed many of his victims, which he coerced, forced, threatened into being videoed in pornography. Then he used those videos to threaten the victims that he would expose those videos to the public, to their families, to their friends, to their co-workers. So that threat was very intimidating to many of the victims who did not voluntarily do that, never would have, but were threatened, intimidated into it. In any event, Mohammed Al-Fayed sex trafficked some of these victims from place to place. He used his business empire to enable him to execute his plan, his scheme, his design to cause those women who were employees to be victimized, women and girls. Should he be prosecuted? Can he be prosecuted? I will not opine on British law because I'm not licensed in Great Britain. Having said that, we have wonderful barristers here, very experienced ones who could say that. We think that the focus should be on winning accountability. And we think our victims who are here today and others who are not here today deserve accountability in the civil justice system. I will just say, sometimes the prosecution of a criminal case can interfere with a civil claim being able to move forward. And we say in the United States, justice delayed is justice denied. And it's been denied to these victims long enough, is just my opinion.
No,
so
I
that, I think, is
I just want to deal with the second question.
I hope the answer to the
It is
question.
absolutely. Can I deal with the second part of your question, the question directed to me? Thank you, Gloria. And just to put a gloss as a experienced criminal barrister as well, yes, these were crimes. So had he been alive, he would have been prosecuted, or ought to have been, perhaps, prosecuted. In any event, can I just deal, Simon, with your two aspects? You asked 2 points about it. First of all, why are we not pursuing, I think was your question, other parties? Can I say it is certainly not the case that we are not pursuing other parties. You will hear this phrase once now, you may hear it a few more times today. We are not ruling anything out. Why the focus on Harrods? I'll tell you the focus on Harrods and the reason for that. This was systematic trafficking of women for sexual gratification. That system began with a selection process where women of similar age, look, were selected. Once that selection had taken place, unbeknownst to them, intrusive medical examinations were undertaken in order to ensure their, let's use this dreadful phrase, suitability. They would then be put into a vulnerable position where they would be isolated, called up to the chairman's office or his private quarters, where despicable acts would take place. And then there would be the cover-up. You will lose your job if you speak to anyone about this. Or you're someone alone and people jump out at you. This is and was a systematic failure of corporate responsibility. And that systematic failure is on the shoulders of Harrods. I said earlier that we do not and will not individualize, that we will individualize the women here, but we will not individualize those who we hold responsible. We are not going to get into a situation where there's any room for anyone to seek to avoid responsibility by saying it was their fault or it was their fault. So we pursue Harrods and we focus on Harrods at this stage because of the collective corporate responsibility and the vicarious liability that these acts and the evidence that we have come across shows clearly. There is a pattern beyond peradventure in this. These are not accidents. These are not unconnected matters. The documentary, if I may say so, showed that beyond peradventure. So we're ruling nothing out, but we have a specific laser focus for justice for these women.
Hi there, Elizabeth from ITV News. Are you aware or have you become aware of any employee survivors at Al-Fayed's other businesses or ventures like Fulham Football Club?
Could I ask, Mary, would you like to deal with that?
Yes, we are aware of allegations that have been made at other places of work. We represent also women who were employed by the Ritz. We don't at this stage represent any women who, for instance, sustained attacks at Fulham Football Club, but our investigations are obviously ongoing into all these entities that he had an involvement in, because our investigations so far have revealed that the number of women involved in this simply from Harrods has been startling. So it's highly unlikely that there are not victims out there from these other places of work. Wherever he went, there will be victims.
Hi, I'm Shimon from Sky News. I note that you made a point of the importance of victims receiving meaningful accountability for what they've suffered. Do you mind just explaining what you mean by this?
If it was my phrase, I'm happy to deal with that. Meaningful accountability means having a proper voice and having the ability to tell your story, to tell your version and to tell the facts as they were without fear of threat. That is hugely significant. And there are always suggestions that whenever lawyers get involved, it's only about the money. It is not. This is about women coming forward and for the very first time in this whole dreadful episode, having an ability to say and tell us what happened to them without fear of being threatened. If, and we would obviously invite them to do so, if Harrods feel that they ought to compensate women financially for what they've done and how they failed them, then of course that is something which we would welcome. But we are not going to sit here and accept any suggestion that we are only interested in money. This is about much, much, much more.
Yeah, can I just add, Dean, actually, to that over the past year, speaking with now 40 of the survivors, not one has ever asked me, what do you think I'll get? Never. And I think that says it all, doesn't it?
I would like to add that coming forward may mean different things to different people. There is coming forward and telling what happened to them to the press. We don't tell, at least I don't tell, any clients that I may have, you should speak to the press. It really is up to them and always up to their attorney to advise of the benefits and risks of speaking publicly. Some people want to come forward, but not publicly. They want to come forward in a confidential, safe manner. And that means speaking to their attorneys, explaining what happened to them in a confidential setting. It's always confidential speaking to attorneys. And I understand that's the case in the UK as well as the United States.
It is.
Attorneys are not permitted to disclose confidential communications with them by a client who is consulting them on their options or decides to move forward with a claim. So I just want everyone to know that even though some survivors are here today who did not come forward publicly, we also care about them. And we know that you have chosen the right team of barristers to advocate for you, to support you, and to communicate with you in a way that is transparent for you, understandable by you, and that you get to ask any questions which you may have and know what might happen next. Because when fear was used as a weapon against you, and fear is the weapon worldwide that sexual predators use to trap their victims, to isolate their victims, to intimidate their victims so that they will not seek accountability. But now you are free from the fear. And those who wronged you, who are still alive, who have a lot of power, the fear should be for them to suffer, not knowing what you will do next. Because now you're empowered. An empowered woman is something that is very threatening to those who have committed injustices and wronged women, because she will not tremble in front of them. She knows her rights. She's going to assert her rights. She will be vindicated, and she will make those who should be accountable in a way that is meaningful to her. An empowered woman is a woman who understands her own strength, understands that she had more courage than she ever knew that she had, and more strength to move forward. And she will not be trapped by the damage that was done to her, and paralyzed and still living in fear, feeling shame, feeling guilty, second-guessing herself. There's no reason to feel guilty. We know who was guilty. It was Muhammad Al-Fayed. It was Harrods. It was all those who knew and enabled and justified their not stopping him. But you are going to make the business empire accountable. This is not something that is just about Muhammad Al-Fayed. This was a business empire enabling him. In that way, it's very, very similar to what is being alleged now against Sean Diddy Combs, because he is being prosecuted not only as a person who sex trafficked women, which is one of the charges, but his business empire. He is charged with what we call RICO violations, and that has to do with his business empire. So I just want to echo what Dean said earlier. This is about corporate responsibility. And corporations do have a responsibility. It's not just a responsibility to their shareholders to earn profits. It's a responsibility to have a safe workplace, not to shut their eyes to what is going on there or think, oh, well, that's just about an individual. No. It's not. It's a safe workplace that they have a legal and moral duty to provide. So that's, take other questions.
Briar Stewart from CBC News. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on the global scope of the case. We know that this unfolded in different countries and there are victims of different nationalities. And also, what do you think it says about Al-Fayed's influence and just the justice system overall, that these women could only come forward in this meaningful way after Al-Fayed's death?
I'm going to ask Bruce to deal with the global scope. It's vast, but he'll be able to give you a bit more detail.
Yeah, the scope of this claim is vast, and I often say to my colleagues, it's a bit like we've lifted up the stone, but we just don't know quite yet what's all underneath. We have survivors from all over the world, from Malaysia, Australia, from Italy, from Romania, from America. We have, I think, 6 ladies who are Americans. We have 3 ladies from Canada, one who was seriously assaulted when she was 16. And the global aspect of this case, which is why we say this is, albeit we're here in the UK now, is not where the case we see as being necessarily determined, is because this is a claim that will affect far-reaching jurisdictions. And obviously I can't really say a lot more than that at this point because we've got to finalise and we've got to work through it all. But certainly we do not see this as anything but a global claim by all those ladies, no matter where they're from or where they lived, to be able to get some sort of accountability. And also, to add into that, that the assaults, the rapes, the attempted rapes were carried out all over the world as well. It wasn't just in, Harrods, UK.
Thank you. And Bruce, thank you, Bruce, for that. And just to pick up on the second part of your question about why it is that people are speaking up now, if that was the import of your question, all I would say to you is, you saw the documentary last night. You saw the obstacles and the handicaps that were put in front of people to have the ability to speak up without fear. I don't think I need to add anything to that.
Can I just add on to that? It's not only the documentary, but it's women who have dared to speak out and raise complaints to Harrods previously. It's not just a justice system that challenges them, it's the system overall. We've seen from the documents that we've seen in relation to those ladies who've had the bravery to actually submit a complaint to Harrods before now, that their case will be undermined at every single opportunity. They will be told how they will fail and how they will not succeed. And that's just something to bear in mind when Harrods are talking about how they want to look after these ladies and that they've had a settlement process in place. We've been able to see that and some of the communications that have been sent to some of these women, and they are undermined at every single opportunity.
Helena Wilkinson, BBC News. A question for you, Natasha, if I may. You talked about finding freedom to be able to talk today about what happened to you. How does that feel?
It feels odd after all these years to be able to speak about it. It feels good to change a legacy of a man who really was a monster. And I don't think we really comprehended that at the time because I think we felt like it was just part of it. I don't think we didn't really realise what was going on. So it is finally, it's a good feeling to be able to change that legacy. And I have daughters and nieces, and I just, the thought of that happening to them at, at tender age is awful.
I'd just add that these survivors are role models in courage. They know what happened to them. They've described it in detail, either publicly or to the barristers, or sometimes to others who were supportive of them. This is a teaching moment for Harrods. It's a teaching moment for other corporations, frankly, all over the world, because sexual abuse of employees who were female, and sometimes, of course, men are victimized as well in their employment area. We've dealt with that. Male victimization by a person in power of a male victim who was not in power, is in a lower echelon in the workplace. But in this case, these were female victims. Why? The old saying, never underestimate a woman, applies. They underestimated the courage of these victims to ever do anything about it. That's a big mistake for corporate responsibility officers, and some corporations do have that, an officer in charge of their corporate responsibility. So just remember, these victims are all over the world. We don't know where all of them are located. but courage is contagious. And the courage of the women who are here today, the victims, will be heard and seen all over the world. In this documentary, in other interviews anyone may choose to do or not, just knowing that there's so many victims who are committed to vindicating their rights and making a large corporation accountable, that will bring a smile to many women who are also being victimized elsewhere and afraid to talk about it. So, yes, it's the courage of women that's contagious that will now be known about all over the world, and that's so important to others. And the only way we're going to improve the status and the condition and the rights of women is for women to know they matter, they are valued, and they will one day assert their rights. And the wrongdoers will be exposed. They will be shamed. They will be humiliated. And the world will know that they are the guilty ones. Never be silent in the face of injustice. When you assert yourself and go to a lawyer, you are building brick by brick a house of courage, not only for yourself, but all over the world. And there will be women smiling and saying to their daughters, maybe you can do this too. Maybe you can ask for accountability in the legal system. At least find out what your rights are. And then you can decide, do you want to assert them? Do you not want to assert them? Do you maybe want to assert them? And you will have people who will come and help you. The isolation, the batterers and predators, and that's what he is, a predator. Also, a child molester. I never call them, those who molest children, pedophiles, because it's a Latin word that means you love children. You don't love children if you're molesting them, abusing them, sexually harassing them, and violating them. So these women were not just sex objects. They are full human beings. They are adults. Now they have memories of the past, but now the memories of the past that have haunted them hopefully will be relieved by an understanding of what is possible in the future, and that they are role models in courage, and they can continue because they will not be isolated the way Muhammad Al-Fayed and others tried to isolate them. Don't tell anyone. In a way, I wish Muhammad Al-Fayed was alive to know about what his legacy really is now, the truth, that the truth will prevail.
Hello, Gordon Rayner from The Telegraph. Question for Dean and a question for Natasha. Dean, you mentioned that the complaints go beyond just Fayed. So the question to you is, are you aware of any of the survivors making complaints to the police, either now or in the past, about people who worked for Fayed? And then I just wanted to ask Natasha, do you feel that the survivors were perhaps let down by the Crown Prosecution Service, who have had lots of chances over the years to catch up with Fayed? He was arrested, he was questioned several times. As you've said, the panel has said, his behaviour was known about from the 1990s. And also, do you feel that perhaps Keir Starmer, who was in charge of the CPS when the 15-year-old who was on the documentary last night was told that there wouldn't be a prosecution, does Keir Starmer perhaps owe you an apology for not having caught up with Fayed?
I think that's perhaps a bit of an unfair question for Natasha.
Yeah, can I, Natasha could obviously answer to the extent she wishes to answer. We obviously know the reasons why that was asked, and no disrespect at all to the question, but I'll deal with the first part of the question, and Natasha, you can obviously say whatever you'd like to say.
I'm not comfortable.
And Natasha's going to pass on that one, as I think is her right. Well, I'm absolutely sure it's her right. May I just deal with the question you asked about complaints to the police? This wasn't just abuse perpetrated by Mohammed Al-Fayed, as I've sought to explain in terms of the prevailing system. It is clear, and was clear from the documentary, that the police were involved. And that's the answer to your question. The police clearly were involved in this case. The extent of their involvement, unsurprisingly, I'm not privy to. But we know that a complaint was made by, I think she was 15 at the time, a young woman of 15 years old, against a 80, or I think he was 78 or 80 at the time. So we're aware that the police were involved. And one of the earlier questions was about people speaking up and the timing of them speaking up. I would commend that part of the documentary to you, where that 15, she was then 15, the lady obviously was much older now, but where she cried her eyes out because she'd got the day wrong. So the answer to your question is, we're aware that the police were involved. This is not a criticism of the police. It's not any kind of judgment on the police action. But we're obviously aware that the police were involved in this.
Yeah, but I was asking whether you were aware of anybody else, anybody having made a complaint to the police about anybody other than Fayed, because you said earlier it went beyond just him.
Well, I think it's, the answer to your question is, I was speaking in terms of the serialized systematic sexual abuse, not about whether there were criminal complaints to the police. So the context in which I was talking about other people was those who enabled the system to take place and to produce the results that Al-Fayed in particular wanted to produce. That was my answer in respect to that. It wasn't in connection with the police.
Hi, Bianca from the Law Society Gazette. Just a few questions. Where is the case in terms of have claims already been lodged with the court? At what stage are you at? And why not a class action suit? Why individual claims? And also, you mentioned the NDAs. Can you explain a little bit more about your reasoning as to why you feel you can fight those in court?
I'm happy to deal with, I've been speaking a lot, but I'm happy to deal with part of that question. Do you want to deal first with the NDAs?
Shall I deal with the, where we are in terms of the legal action? So claims have not yet been issued. As you can appreciate from what you've heard so far, this abuse that was suffered by women was worldwide. So there are lots of different potential elements to this, potential jurisdictional elements that need to be considered, different individuals that also need to be considered. So it's not just the case that we just go off. Whilst we accept and we know we have an obligation to act diligently and promptly, we are still very much investigating, liaising with, for instance, people like Gloria, experts, for instance, in the US, because we represent a number of US survivors. So, no, we haven't issued, but we are very much getting our action together.
Let me deal then with the two other matters that you raised. The first is why no class action. So I have extensive experience in class actions. Very much as in the US, as in the UK, there are technical issues regarding similarity of class, So that's a legal answer. But actually the real answer is that every single person, every single survivor suffered and suffers different harm here and different long-term effects. And we are not going to, as a team, allow other considerations, which may be financial, to have people's lives and responsibility and their rights compromised by the fact that it's easier to deal with the class action in order to get some money out at the end. That is not why we're here. It is not our aim. It is not our purpose. I am very strong about this. Everyone who comes to us will be treated as an individual. And I hope those who are here today can attest to that. Can I then deal with the limitation point? If the law is, and as you will be aware, knowing where you come from, obviously the Law Society Gazette, you will be aware that the Limitation Act in the UK, and I won't speak for the minute about across the world, but I'm pretty confident there's some respectable arguments I'm about to deploy here, which would be deployed by others. If it's the case that a corporate can put into effect a system which causes individuals to suffer serious sexual abuse, threaten them with cover-up, threaten them not to say anything, so cause a cover-up, threaten them to keep quiet, threaten them not to tell anybody. If that same corporate then seeks to bring the argument to a judge that their claims should be disapplied by reason of passage of time, then that is not a society in which I certainly want to live. The limitation periods are there for good, practical, legal reasons, but they can also be disapplied for good, legal, humanitarian reasons. And it's really important when we deal and think about limitation here. And I would challenge, I hold out a challenge here to Harrods. If Harrods are going to seek to say to us, these claims should be barred on the basis of limitation, then they are effectively adopting the argument that threats will always win the day. We will not accept that argument, and we are pretty confident the courts won't either.
May I comment? Okay. All right. Just a few points to piggyback on what Dean just said. In the United States, our law firm does not generally participate in class actions. However, we represent large groups of victims. For example, we represented 72 victims who were victims of sexual abuse. These were young women at the University of Southern California, victims of sexual abuse by the gynecologist who provided services to them when they were students and some faculty at the University of Southern California. 72 victims. We've represented many groups of women who were victims, some larger, some smaller groups, without a class action. I won't go into all of the different cases, but if somebody wants to know later, I'd be happy to provide the answers. Because we do believe in individual attention, individual assessment of a client's claim. We don't think one size fits all. Everybody's had a different situation in some ways where they have been victimized and different damages. One other thing I want to say about the statute of limitations, which is the arbitrary time period set by law, by different legislative bodies in different countries, generally. In the past, it definitely has favored the wrongdoer, not the victim. I've met with advocates from other countries in Europe, I'll just put it that way, who are seeking to change, eliminate, modify the statute of limitations elsewhere. You have a more favorable statute of limitations in the UK than we have in the United States. But as you will see, some of my clients and myself, clients of Bill Cosby, in my Netflix documentary, Seeing All Red, they see us testifying before the legislature in California to eliminate or change the restrictions in the statute of limitations. All this is about empowering victims to be able to not be barred from the courthouse, not to have the courthouse door slammed in their face because of this arbitrary law called statute of limitations, which most of them never knew about. They didn't know that there was a time period after which they would be barred from asserting their claim. You can do that more easily in the UK, and I'll be mentioning the UK at other legislative hearings on this matter in the US. Although I would add that sometimes the damages are significantly less, even though you have more time to bring them, than you would be able to win with your courage than you would be able to win in the United States. Let's see. Last point about large corporations. Like in the United States, we have something called RICO. You may have heard of it, Racketeering, Influence Corrupt Organizations Act, which Sean Diddy Combs is charged with in a criminal case. So the United States is recognizing the role of large businesses which are used to enable the predator to victimize their victims. He generally is not acting alone. He's getting a lot of support from others. Finally, I just want to say, if we had more women as chairpersons of large corporations and less segregation of women forced to be in lower level jobs, many of which are well below their capacity to do them, and their education, their background, their experience, and their dreams. If we had less segregation by gender in the workplace to lower level jobs for women, because women are considered of less value because they're women, if we had more integrated workplace, if we had by gender and race and age, ethnic origin, and so forth, and of course sexual orientation, we would have a better workplace. We would have a more productive workplace. It would be in the corporation's interest to do that. And again, not enough women, either in the UK or in the United States, who are at the top level, let's say Fortune 500 companies, other large corporations. That has to change. And maybe we'd have less sexual abuse by people in power if the people in power were women. I'd like us to find out if I'm right. That there's not enough women at the top levels of corporations. That's all I have to say about that.
Time for two last questions. We keep them quick, please.
Hi, Alex Croft, The Independent. Are any of the executive staff from during Fayed's time still in place in Harrods, and do you envisage ever any criminal action against those who were involved in covering up but not any actual allegations.
I'll ask Maria to deal with the factual scenario of whether one's still in place. As regards criminal activity, as I've said before, this is not for us to say, I'm afraid. We do not have that capacity to tell you, so therefore we won't.
In terms of the first aspect, we're not aware of any people that may still be in place at Harrods, but obviously this is a case that is rapidly evolving and expanding every single day. Even from yesterday, the amount of emails that we have received of people offering to provide evidence to us to support the women who've been brave to speak out has been overwhelming. So it's an evolving process.
Last question, please.
Zoe McGee, ABC News. Natasha, I was very struck by your bravery and, well, all the women here. But what I wanted to ask was, you said that you are no longer afraid. Could you tell us how you got to that point?
Yeah, by my lovely friend here, Catherine, involving me in this process. I think we all stand together, and if you can stand together as a woman, you have the strength to not be afraid anymore.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone. We appreciate you coming here. We salute the bravery. Again, it'll never be said too many times. Salute the bravery of the survivors.